Welcome to another episode of the Heartland Author Podcast. I'm Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing Kirsten Weiss, a mystery author who has written dozens of books. Some of her mysteries are cozy and some aren't. I'm here with Kirsten Weiss, the author of dozens of mystery books. Kirsten, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me on.
As always, my first question is to ask you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Oh, gosh. Thank you for that big, wide open question, which I suddenly have no idea how to answer. I'm a writer. I've been writing, I started writing when I was a little kid. Of course, I didn't get published when I was a little kid. I got serious about writing back in 2011, 2012. I had been working overseas doing this weird thing called microcredit. When I came back to the United States, nobody knew what the heck to do with me. So after trying and failing several things and realizing I just didn't fit into the quote unquote normal work world anymore, I thought, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to start writing a book and see what happens. And my first book was sort of an urban fantasy mystery, the Rika Hayworth series. And kind of built from there. I stumbled into an authors cooperative, and then I got an agent, and then I started publishing other more traditional cozy mystery novels. I didn't have any magic in with some traditional publishers. And I'm still working with my authors cooperative because I love them. And I've been publishing a mix of funny cozy mysteries and sort of magical mysteries as well.
Now, as you have written many books and multiple series of books, I'm not going to ask you to briefly describe every single book you've written, but I'm going to ask you to describe each of your book series.
Well, my Rika Hayworth series, like I mentioned, it's urban fantasy. The heroine is middle-aged, she's in her 40s, so a little older than the typical urban fantasy female heroine these days. And I guess one thing that kind of runs through all of those magical series is I tried to base the magic on sort of traditional folklore and magic as it's being practiced today. So like with my Rika Hayworth series, I focus on a different type of magical practice in each book. I've got the Hermetic detective, the Hoodoo detective, the Alchemical detective. And then I've got another witch mystery series, the Doyle Witches, which is more witch cozy mystery than urban fantasy. And again, I really tried to pull from fairy folklore and from the way people were practicing witchcraft and magic today to build those worlds. And then I've got sort of my kind of not quite paranormal mysteries. I've got a paranormal museum mystery series, which the hook there is that this woman gets railroaded into running a paranormal museum, and she's a paranormal skeptic, but all these odd things are happening. So she's kind of left wondering, and the reader's left wondering, wait, is something actually paranormal going on, or is something else going on? And the reader gets to decide. And then I've got my Tea and Tarot series, which is set in a tea room with tarot readers, and I happen to read tarot myself, so I, again, try to be as realistic as possible with how the tarot works and all that. And then I've got just my Pie Town series, which is just a straight up funny cozy mystery, no magic involved. And what else have I got? Oh, and I have a steampunk series, which is set. I decided to shoot myself in the foot, and instead of setting it in England like every other steampunk series, I set it in California during the gold rush, just to be different. I think that's all of them.
Now you have, if I understand correctly, more than one book currently available for pre-order. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've got. I'm starting a new cozy mystery series called the Big Murder Mystery series, and the Big Shot's available for pre-order. If you pre-order the ebook, it's only 99 cents. And if you go to my website and you've pre-ordered the ebook, there's all sorts of extras, including a murder mystery game you can play with your friends. So I'm trying to make it fun.
Now, when is the published date for this book that is currently available for pre-order?
Oh, Big Shot publishes May 31st of this year, 2022.
Okay, so the last day in May of this year.
Yeah, so your last chance to get the pre-order goodies is May 30th.
Okay. Now, have you ever written a book outside of a series?
I do have one book that's outside of a series. I was thinking of turning it into a series, and then I kind of got distracted. That's the Mannequin Offensive, and that's also kind of a urban fantasy paranormal, featuring a woman who runs a personal protection company, otherwise known as a bodyguard company, who gets injured in an explosion, and then all sorts of starts hearing voices basically, and she thinks she's crazy, but she's not.
Yeah, the first book I wrote was a motorsports fiction book titled Lady in the Fast Lane, and it was supposed to be part of a multiple part series, and I canceled the rest of the series because when I was outlining the planned second book in the series, the plot line was too similar to the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash for my comfort level.
Yeah, sometimes that happens. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I can't really explain. Again, I had an idea for the series. I had the names, and I just never wrote the other books. Although the heroine in the series does turn up in other books. She makes sort of cameo appearances. So I do like the character a lot. I just, for whatever reason, couldn't get my act together to write more books in the series.
Now, are all your books self-published, or are all your books traditionally published, or do you have a mix of self-published and traditionally published books?
Yeah, I'm what's called a hybrid author. I have a mix. I have my Pytown series is published by Kensington. My Paranormal Museum series was originally published by Midnight Inc., which was a branch of Llewellyn, and then Midnight Inc. shut down, so I got the rights back to that. And the rest of my books I'm publishing through an authors cooperative called Mysterio Press, which has been wonderful to work with.
Now, on average, how many hours per day do you devote to writing, and what is your typical writing routine like?
Oh, I'm a full-time writer these days, so usually I start writing at about 7:30 in the morning, and my goal is to have a first draft of a chapter knocked out by 9 o'clock. That's when I do my Tai Chi class. And then after my class, I do some marketing until about lunchtime. And then after lunch, I just work on editing. So it's a mix of every day I write a chapter, every day I get some editing in, and every day I spend time on marketing the books.
You have written many mysteries as evidenced by or answers to other questions in this interview so far. Now, I'm someone who is currently writing many books in several different genres, and do you believe it is easier or harder to write many books in one genre as opposed to writing many books across several different genres?
Well, I think the challenge comes with the marketing. I mean, even though all of my books are mysteries, there is a split between people who want to read a mystery with paranormal elements and people who want to read a straight cozy mystery without those elements in it. And I was advised early on to have different pen names for one pen name for my paranormal mysteries and a different pen name for my regular mysteries. And I decided not to do that because I realized if I was going to be, even if you're with a traditional publisher these days, authors end up getting stuck with a lot of the marketing. And if you have different names, you have to have a different marketing campaign for each name. You have to have different websites. It's so much harder to manage. You're basically running a different company for each brand, or a different company campaign for each brand. And I just didn't want to do that. And it turns out there is some crossover. There are some people who are like, okay, I see a Kirsten Weiss book, I'm going to read a Kirsten Weiss book. I don't care if there's paranormal in it or not. There's some people who just like, nope, strictly cozy. Some people are, nope, strictly witches. But, I think readers are smart enough to get, you can see by the cover, okay, this is a Kirsten Weiss witch mystery. Love it, hate it, whatever. So that's the challenge is figuring out the marketing, figuring out who your clients are, figuring out how you can bring clients from one genre over to the next. Because I'm trying to sell as many books as possible, like every other author. And when you're splitting the market between genres, it can get confusing for people.
Now, you've described some of your books as cozy mysteries. Now, I had a different question written down than the one I'm going to ask you, but some people who aren't familiar with the mystery novels might view a book being described as a cozy mystery as kind of a self-contradiction. What exactly is a cozy mystery, and what makes it different from other types of mysteries?
I'm so glad you asked that, because as a writer, I tend to take that jargon for granted, and I shouldn't. So a cozy mystery is a person is killed, but the reader doesn't see the murder happen. There's usually an amateur detective involved, and they stumble across the body, or somebody they know has stumbled across the body. So it's very, very bloodless. You don't see the violence happening. Unlike in a more suspenseful book, you'll see the murder. It's going to happen. Your hair is standing on end, and you've got the image imprinted in your mind of what's going on. And cozy readers are more interested in the puzzle. They want to see justice done, but they don't necessarily want to see the gore associated with an actual crime. And again, typically there's an amateur detective instead of a policeman solving the crime. A policeman solving the crime would be more of what they call a police procedural generally. Typically, cozy mysteries are also set in small towns rather than dark and gritty cities. And you may be able to weave a lot of humor in there with quirky characters, funny situations. Cozy mysteries also can often be heavy on the subplot. I mean, my cozy mysteries are, for me, my mystery is sort of the frame for the story, but there's always something else going on in my hero's life, whether that's a romantic entanglement or just some challenge with the business, or just something ridiculous going on, where I can weave in more humor. So I don't know. I'm not a violent person. I'm not particularly bloodthirsty. But even when I was a kid and I picked up my first Sherlock Holmes story and started reading Nancy Drews, I just always loved a good mystery, and I still do.
Now, I was looking up information about your bio and background in preparation for this interview, and I found out that you lived in the former Soviet Union for a time prior to its dissolution in 1991. What was it like living in the former Soviet Union, and what are your thoughts about the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine?
It was, oh gosh, I have so many thoughts. Probably not particularly qualified to opine on it, but yeah, I joined the Peace Corps, and it was right after the Soviet Union fell apart, and I wound up in Estonia. And then I wound up in Kyrgyzstan a couple years later, and then the Republic of Georgia. And it was a very difficult time. The oligarchs were stealing all the money. Everything broke apart. The people in charge and their buddies stole everything they could, and they still have it all. It was completely corrupt. And the average Joe was the one who took the hit. The legal system was a wreck. Only poor people went to jail in Georgia because only poor people couldn't afford to bribe the cops. It was very difficult doing business because contracts didn't mean a thing if you couldn't enforce them. The infrastructure was a wreck. I mean, in Georgia, we had electricity only half the day during the winter time, and the summertime was better. But if you go out into the countryside, they didn't have electricity at all. So it's tough to run a business and get things done under those circumstances. Now, Russia has been taking bites out of Georgia whenever they get a chance. They use the same darn excuse they're using in Ukraine, that the Georgians were oppressing Russians and human rights violations and atrocities. And I remember after I think it was 2004, they went in, I might be getting the dates wrong, but they went into Ossetia and grabbed a piece of Ossetia, and they were against a bunch of Georgian refugees who got kicked out of Ossetia and living in hotels in the main part of Georgia. And I remember talking, after I'd left Georgia, talking to a Russian woman who was telling me that she was crying when she told me this about how the Georgians had been boiling the Ossetians alive in their basements. And I thought, no, they weren't. That was the propaganda she was getting from Putin. And that was all they were hearing, was that the Georgians were doing horrible things to Ossetians. And it's like, it was just ridiculous stories. And I'm just sure the same thing is happening in Russia now. And they're probably hearing the same stories about Ukrainians boiling Russian Ukrainians in their basements and stupid stuff like that. And they're probably believing it because that's all they're hearing for the most part. So it's just, Putin's playing the same games he's been playing for decades, and he got away with it over and over. He got pieces of Georgia, he got Crimea, so I'm not surprised he thought he could take another bite out of Ukraine. My big surprise, I really didn't think he was going to go this far with it. I thought he'd just take another bite, which is what, again, he's been doing. But instead, he seems to be trying to go all the way. So it's terrible, it's tragic, it's been happening over and over again, and it's very depressing.
Well, Kirsten, that's my last question, so thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author podcast, and glory to Ukraine.
Absolutely. Viva Ukraine.
I enjoyed interviewing Kirsten, and I hope y'all read some of her books. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at authoraac.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter at authoraac. You can also watch videos on the Heartland Author channel on YouTube. Copyright 2022, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of its audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.